Hello, everybody, or anybody who may be watching. Not everything's perfect, but it seems to be somewhat working. For some reason, Mixer seems to think that I'm playing emergency room real-life rescues and not a IRL, but close enough, I guess. Let's see if I can get that fixed. I'm not entirely sure what the Mixer uses for IRL streams, but whatever. Switch it over on Twitch, see if that fixes something. Fuck it. Oh well. Anyway, welcome. Hello. I'm here doing my first IRL stream, chatting about my Patreon and the writing prompts and all of that stuff that I do in my free time. So this is kind of just a chill listen to what I have on right now. I got Mr. Momo Music. Don't know the guy, obviously. Just kind of a plug. This is what I listen to when I'm doing my writing in my free time. So while I'm here doing some writing, people can ask questions or check out my actual Patreon themselves. It's linked on my Twitch. It's linked on my YouTube, I think. I don't know if I have anything linked on Mixer yet, but patreon.com/JelanoCrowley. Check out some of my stuff if you want to give it a read. Go right ahead. Otherwise, send me messages. Do whatever you want. I'll do my best to answer, and only be here. This will be a 45 minute stream, just kind of relaxing and going over some of the stuff. So yeah, ask questions, check it out, see if you like anything. Right now I have everything set up so it's free for everything until the end of the year. I'm redoing the entire channel, and I will have everything switch over at the beginning of the new year. I will have it so you have to be at least a $1 member to have 1 month early access to every single one of my releases. But after the 1 month, the content releases for free. But obviously the higher tiers have access to more content, such as access to my private Patreon, or my private Discord channel, as well as a few other things, such as I'm working on a private forum for specifically high members to submit their concerns, stuff like that. Not entirely sure how that's going to go. I might just run everything from the Discord and say screw it. But other than that, trying to think here what else I had to talk about. Obviously, the even highest tiers will have access to full physical copies when they come out. Right now, I'm really far away from having any completed projects. I'm about 4 chapters into my main stories. I'm working on chapter 4 for my secondary story, Panic. And that should be coming out within the next week or two. Hopefully I'll feel it's good enough to post. And some of the other projects are on kind of a backlog. I'm working on minor details here and there for Soulblade, my P20 engine, but details on that are very, very difficult to go over by yourself. Even with something like D&D or Pathfinder as a basis, I haven't even gotten a chance to play in any campaigns of my own in ages. Nobody I know is around anymore, or they've just been doing their own thing, and it's just kind of hard to get everyone together in the same room in order to do anything. As well as the Project Slayer, working on all of the micro details for weapons, armor, spells, what everything is going to look like in design overall. plot line's going to be the hardest one because I don't really have a huge amount there yet. I've been spending a lot of time with my main projects and whatnot, as well as mostly focusing on my main projects, I guess. I spent about 3.5 hours around Tuesday last week writing. I just had a manic fit and I had to go through and write. And before I knew it, it was almost 9 o'clock. And after getting off work at 5 o'clock and having all of that time disappear when I'm usually trying to play games and trying to relax after my stressful work day, I try to do that at least. But it just means I'm moving in the right direction for if I want to do this full time, which I do want to do the writing and the streaming and the gaming full time, but I can't do that without the support of other people. So this is kind of my first step into doing that. What else do I have going on here? I also started the second chapter for my side project, Deus. It's gonna be a lot more difficult to do because I'm not a huge sci-fi guy, but it's based off of a Mechton campaign that a friend of mine was running. Neolight, he's been in a couple of my streams a long time ago. He's been my DM for several campaigns, for several editions of D&D and whatnot. Mostly Pathfinder. We're huge Pathfinder junkies. But he ran a Mechton campaign with a couple of us for a few times, and we were thinking it was going really well, but at the same time we were also kind of destroying his campaign because we were too powerful for what he wanted to do. So Deus is just another side project I'm working on. Let's see here. What other things do I have going on? I was going to post some maps for my main world for the Rugenda campaign. For the plot line and all of that. Everything that I'm writing right now for that campaign, for that book, is before everything I currently have written. And everything that I know actually happens. Because I took the world and I threw it into a Pathfinder campaign, and it had just kept going for 2.5 years, and then I just recently lost all of my members. Half of them moved to entirely different states, and the other half of them who moved are currently deployed, so they're in another entire country, and they won't be back for at least a year. So, trying to get people together to do something like that is near impossible at this point in time. So, canonically, from where I have that written, is the start of the book is 1 year prior to where I started my campaign and introduced all of the characters that my friends played, who will have places in the story, but for right now, it's establishing the world, getting everything set in stone, getting some of the characters introduced who will be there forever, as well as going over history from before that, and making sure everything is coherent, I suppose the best way to put it. Let's see here. What else? That's the wrong file here. I'm just kind of going through my drive through all of my side projects and one at a time going over what's going to be my main focuses. My next obvious content release is going to be the next chapter of Panic. I seem to have a lot more time invested in that recently. For anybody who hasn't read it before, it is going to be based around my view of what I would enjoy as a anime. So things are going to be a little bit more dramatic, I guess. The flow of writing is a lot more different than what I'm used to doing, entirely from the first person, from someone who has a very separate personality from me. in every sense. There's going to be a few overlaps with a couple of my other projects, because I feel like that would be interesting to do regardless. But for anybody who hasn't checked it out, the basis behind it is the main characters all have these psychic abilities, and they gained their psychic abilities from having what is called an oversoul. Very similar to, like, obviously the naming connotation comes from something like Shaman King, which I was a huge junkie of back in the day. I was really upset when the manga ended, and there's a couple of overlays from that in here, but not in the same sense, because ghosts are not really involved. It's more of... I'm trying to figure out how the best way to word it. These secondary souls come from an entirely separate source, because this entire world revolves around resurrection. When someone is born, souls from everything around them are formed into their soul as they're being born or in the womb, whatnot. So as their life is becoming into being, they are gaining parts of souls of everything in around them. Because every living being in this world has a soul and gives small parts of it away every time something is born. And when they die, it's dispersed in the same way. Everything around them is given portions of those souls. But there are greedy human souls who do not want to pass on, malicious souls that become what are known as trauma. Literal spiritual monsters that most people cannot see, except for those who possess one of these oversouls, secondary souls over their own. Usually granted to them by someone who passed on, who had an oversoul themselves. It's going to be listed later on in a chapter or two farther down the line how that all works. Some of it is listed in the detail page I posted a very long time ago. The pilot for it all. There's a lot of details in there. Mostly gives it away. You just have to give yourself give it a once over, check it out. If it's something that you'd like, let me know and I'll post more about it. Other than that, these trauma attack people in order to consume their souls and grow stronger. Trauma have varying levels. The levels are scaled based on the 7 deadly sins, with wrath and lust being the lowest tier on equal terms. And when someone's interacted with these trauma, or through a psychotic breakdown, through loss, any type of mental fracturing can unlock their potential and unlock their panic. It's their personal abilities. The main character hasn't entirely discovered hers yet, but it has shown itself. A couple of side characters obviously have their own abilities. They're most of the time formulated by a person's personality, as well as their interests. So if they like something enough, and it becomes a part of them or their personality, their powers can shape into that. So one of the side characters is a huge anime fan, and has a long-standing obsession with shows like Naruto and things like that. So his power is formulated into an aura that takes the similar form to like Naruto, but it's mostly just a flame around him and gargantuan claws, because that's what he sees as what he wants as a power. And as time goes on, they can get stronger and gain more abilities that add up in the tiers. And right now I have the maximum being tier 3. And most abilities are named after legends, gods, devils, just mythical beings in general, that define their ability the way that they would define it. as a person. Let's see here. I'm not sure how much more I want to tangent on that. There's also, this is one of the few projects I planned on implementing into an actual animation, and I'd have to finish it obviously first, and then figure out who would be interested in doing something like that, whether it be a 3D animation such as something like RWBY, or an anime style, and I'd have to find a studio willing to do that, and it'd have to be popular enough and funded enough in order to do that. The basis behind a lot of the other backstories of the characters is it has a huge focus on music, which is why I wanted it to be an animated series, because each ending sequence would be like the main group of characters playing these songs, because they're an actual rock band playing in a bar. So having like a cover band doing their own covers of popular rock music and things like that as the intro and the outros would be really interesting to do. And part of that is because the entire basis behind the idea for that story is I was listening to Release the Panic by Red, and for some reason it just clicked in my head on what if Release the Panic literally meant using a power, and this entire story came from that. It's really interesting how my mind works sometimes, seeing as I spend days like that thinking hundreds and hundreds of things about stories like this, and then I'll have entire other days where I'll spend until 2 a.m. thinking I'm dying of cancer because I feel something stretched in my chest. Like I'll strain my chest, like something in my rib cage from lifting too much during the day, and then my brain will think, oh, this stabbing pain from your muscle, that's actually cancer, you're dying. So having a creative mind is very, very double-edged, and it's not entirely as fun as it sounds. But I'm doing the best I can to make what I am doing what I want to do. Let's see here. What else can I talk about? The main Rugenda story obviously has had its own bases around things like Avatar: The Last Airbender and a few other series like that, because I've grown up having an obsession with the elements and wishing I had the powers over some of these elements, either fire, water, or lightning, something. And this storyline is based off of my interest in doing that. And when I created the basis behind that and started my campaign around that, my Pathfinder campaign, I gave my players freedom to do what they wanted. So I gave them baseline rules for how these powers worked, unless they wanted to focus on doing something else. So I have one guy focusing entirely on taking his earth powers and trying to create golems with their own movement and free will until the power wears off. And he was working on that for a really long time. I also had a fire user who was trying to manifest a physical bow and arrows to fire without having to use his bow and actual arrows. Mostly because of the implications of he strengthens it to a degree that's stronger than a normal bow and arrow. He wanted to do something like that. I had one water user who was learning how to manipulate not only water, but formulate it into ice and mist, and manipulate it into several different forms and switch back and forth rapidly. So these are the bases for stuff that I wanted to do in the story and have it open up to creativity for these players and for the characters involved, giving them the freedom over these elements to do what they wanted. And I have a ton there to write, but I don't feel like it's enough to keep people interested yet. I have 2 years worth of campaign of these guys doing this, and we had a campaign session at least once every weekend for over a year, and had a ton going on. I had people changed out every 6 months. I had a couple people drop, I had a couple people come in, and having these characters flow in and out, I was able to establish, well, this happened, they actually passed away, or they had to go and do their own thing in this world. And I have a punch there to write, but I don't feel like I'm ready yet to completely establish that part of the world. Which is why I started the story a year prior to all of that happening, and all of the main bad things happening. And just establishing, okay, these are a couple of characters that are very important, and what they do in that year before everything happens is extremely important to how what happens throughout the rest of the story and throughout the rest of the history for this world. So it's a slow process, and it's been a couple months since I finished a chapter for the Rugenda story, but I'm getting there. I'm really trying to get there and make sure that the next chapters for every one of these is coherent and interesting, and most of all, I can actually accept it as finished. And to me, that's the hardest thing to do. I'm a perfectionist to an insane degree. If I don't believe something that I'm putting on the page as I put it on the page is perfect, I won't write it at all. And that's one of the hardest parts of being a writer and being a perfectionist, because you get almost nothing done. And I struggle to do that some days. So, let's see. I got about 5 minutes left on this first stream before I move on, and I have to do some other stuff with the rest of my night. So let's go back to the tabletop engine, I suppose. It's the last project I haven't talked much about. But I'm trying to develop a D20 engine for me and my friends mostly, but I also want it to be a public thing that people can actually sit down and enjoy. Right now I have established most of the races and quite a few of the classes. The entire building behind it is, I wanted a very streamlined engine. One that you could just pick a class, pick a race, and go. No complete wasting time on feats and all of these other details. You roll your stats, you pick your racing class, and you're good. The only thing you need at that point is just equipment. And equipment is going to be boiled down very easily based on what type of class and race you chose. So, my nose itches. I have that established, but I'm also changing it up from a 6 stat system to a 10 stat system. Because one of the bases behind Soulblade is the implementation of spiritual capabilities, as well as faith capabilities and things like that. It has a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Inspiration. It has a lot of inspiration from Fire Emblem and Dark Souls and a bunch of other fantasy series like that, where things like that matter. Dark Souls has a huge focus on faith and intelligence behind when it comes to all of your spells. Any Dark Souls junkie knows that, and I'm definitely one of them. I've spent way too many hours on every single Dark Souls game. On Bloodborne. I played Code Vein recently and just played it till I beat it, and absolutely loved that. Just the character creating system alone took me half an hour because of how in-depth it is. Back to this, I broke down some of the stats, so Charisma is no longer a stat. I really just hate it as a stat. I love using it in campaigns, but as a stat itself, I despise it, because it just covers too much. So in Soulblade, I'm trying to break it down from charisma into beauty and eloquence. Two entirely separate stats, focusing on two very separate things. Because you can be someone who is beautiful, but not very intelligent when it comes to how they portray themselves. Eloquence. How they speak, and how they present themselves in public. And you can have someone who is extremely good and outward and forward and social, but not good looking. And I hate the fact that charisma counts as both in most D&D and Pathfinder situations. So I broke that into two separate stats. So right now, the current stats are strength, dexterity, constitution, beauty, instinct, intelligence, wisdom, eloquence, spirit, and faith. Instinct is the last one that I added in to round everything off to the 10 stats, because I feel like it's not implemented enough in some of these series, and some of these under engines, purely because I feel it's just underutilized. So a character can have a super low instinct and not expect anything to happen, and when stuff happens, they actually have to be surprised by it. Or you can have someone with a very high instinct who can see situations differently and expect something to happen and be semi-prepared for it or completely prepared for it based on how high their instinct is, or how well they roll their instinct checks. And of course, faith I added in to divide up spells. So spells are going to be based around arcane, divine, and dark separately. Yes, I'm pulling that from Dark Souls. It makes sense. I'll probably rename it as something like occult. It would make a lot more sense. It is dark magic. So you have to have faith in dark gods, so you still need a high faith stat, so it's the other side of the coin from having a high faith stat and worshipping a good god. And they'll have access to different spells based on that. I also broke apart AC. I absolutely hate how AC works in D&D and Pathfinder, so I broke it apart into armor is entirely damage reduction. So if you get hit, you take less damage because you're wearing more armor. But I also made it so that dice rolls matter in combat entirely more, because when someone attacks, you are not rolling against their AC. You are rolling against their roll. And they get to choose whether or not they're allowed to block or dodge the attack. And you will roll separately based on that. Dodges will be limited based on number of times you can dodge per round. So in between every time that you are the active participant in combat, you can dodge once or twice based on what your dexterity and everything else is. I'm also implementing a mana system instead of just spell levels and spells per day, because it's boring. It's really fucking boring to play a mage in most of the editions, because you have all these amazing fucking spells and you can use them twice in a day. And it makes no sense to me why they can't just implement a mana system and implement potions for mana based the same way that they do for HP. Every campaign I've ever been in has hit point potions fucking everywhere. We start with them in most of mine. And it's just more mechanics that I don't find entirely interesting. I'm also working on grapple mechanics that are a little bit different. More dice versus dice mechanics like that. I also want to add in proficiencies, weapon proficiencies, rather than just having it so that you get a feat that allows you to have an extra 1 damage for a sword attack or something like that, or your chosen weapons, everyone has bare minimum proficiencies in everything, and the more they use a weapon, the higher their proficiency gets. So I have it tiered from E to S, E, D, C, B, A, and S rank. Everyone starts with everything at E, other than 2 stats at D and 1 weapon at C. So I have all of the weapons divided up differently for that. Right now, let's see. 28 different weapons and proficiency types is the best way to put it. And when you start out, E rank has a -3 on all rolls and all damage rolls. So even if you have a super high damaging weapon, so you're using a great sword that does 1d12 or 1d10 damage, and you're an E rank in it, so your to hit with it is going to be -3, and your damage to it, regardless of what your strength is or what you're doing with it, is going to be also -3. A D rank is a -1, C is a 0, B is a 1, A rank is a +3, and S rank, and a complete master of that weapon, which you can only have 1 S rank in any weapon type, is a +5. Just straight off +5 to everything you do with that weapon. I also tried to streamline skills and base it so that skills are more defined based on the new stats I've implemented. So I'm changing around strength checks. Strength checks are no longer a thing. I've implemented force checks. It's the same thing, but it feels like an actual check rather than just, I'm strong, I do this. It's an actual attempt at doing something. But, let's see here. 35. I've ranted for quite a while here. But that's a little bit of the basis into each of my projects. This was just a short trial stream. I want to do 2 of these a week until I get to a point where I'm able to do more of these a week. Obviously, I'd have to have more time as well as a lot more supporters than I currently have. So if this is something you'd be interested in, my lowest tier on Patreon's $1. $1 a month to help me do this full time and finish all of my stories, build greater worlds in all of this, and move on and do even more stuff. Maybe come in contact with more people online that I might, that might support this kind of thing. But if this is something you'd be interested in, please do check out my Patreon, support me if you'd like. And if this is something that someone you know might be interested in, pass it along to them. I'm not too grovelly about all of this. I'm not just going to sit here and beg, hey, do this, I really want your money, stuff like that. No. I want to make stories that people are enjoy. That's all I want to do. I'm not happy doing the physical labor jobs and shit like that I'm currently doing, or I've been doing my entire life. I turned 28 2 weeks. I'm feeling old already, and I feel like I haven't accomplished anything I really want to do. I went to school to make video games, and I graduated that, but in Wisconsin where I live, it's not a thing. We have Raven Software, and they don't hire anybody. And they don't even need to make their own games. They just work on new Call of Duties because they're outsourced by people who make the Call of Duty games. What's the point of making your own games if you can roll in money doing that? So they have no reason to hire new blood, and that's kind of been the way the last couple of years. So if I can do something like this, and then find people along the lines who with interests in doing written work or art or animation for things like this, and go along the lines of something like Rooster Teeth did. Rooster Teeth is one of the best fucking companies on the internet. I don't care what some people say. Their stories are fantastic. They're fun to watch. I've been watching Red vs. Blue since I was in middle school. So I want to do something like that in the future. I just want to make stories that people enjoy. That's it. That's all I want to do with my life. And I can't do that without the help of other people. So please, by any means, support me if you'd like. Pass it along. Share it with people. One way or another, everything I share on the Patreon is going to be free for anybody to view within a month of posting. So artwork, because I'm planning on hiring an artist sooner or later. I used to have one. All of the art that's currently on the page is from an artist that I knew 3-4 years ago, and I haven't really talked to them ever since. So I'm probably going to have to find another new artist in order to do updated work and character designs and things like that. And I really want to do that, but I don't have the money to support that. Things are expensive. Living is just kind of expensive in general. So, by all means, thank you for anybody who's been watching or watched during the time of this. Check out the Patreon. I'll probably be on again Thursday to do another one of these and just kind of tangent in your ear while I write. And I hope everybody's doing alright. And I'll see you all next time.